Take it away, Alan.
Okay, I've heard the recording message. That's good. Well, greetings, everybody who's here. So in this session, I'm going to briefly describe Cool Winchester's eco team that we ran many years ago. Then Natasha Juliana will talk more about the much more ambitious Cool Petaluma program. And after that, hopefully we'll have some time for questions. So let me say something about eco teams. It's not a coincidence that these will sound similar to what Natasha has already been describing, because both programs were actually developed by the same organization named the Empowerment Institute. So you will hear some things are familiar, but I think we kind of augment each other by seeing two different examples. I think it kind of supports the concept of how we can reach more people. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So you should see that now. And so this is a little symbol of Cool Winchester and the idea of diminishing footprint, which is desirable. I want to talk about how we created eco teams. We had volunteers in Winchester. We were all volunteering. So this is very different than the Cool Petaluma program, where it's all volunteer, no funding. And maybe not surprisingly, our impact was a lot smaller than their ambitions. Anyway, the volunteers found partner organizations to organize eco teams. We found them in local nonprofit organizations like Sustainable Winchester, for example. A couple of local churches in particular were very interested, some school groups, some neighborhood groups, and so on. Ultimately, we ended up between 2009 and 2011 forming 20 teams of 140 households total. 140 households participated in those 20 teams. So on average, we had about 7 households per team. But some teams are bigger than others. They tend to be 5 to 10, but a couple were larger. Each person on the team bought the book called The Low Carbon Diet. And you'll see more about that in a second. But I'm thinking one could also, without too much difficulty, based on the book, one could develop one's own materials for the teams to use at each of their meetings. Here you can see this is the book, The Low Carbon Diet. I still have my copy, decade and more later. I'm going to just show you a couple of pages in it just to give you an idea of how the book works and how it encourages the eco teams to make progress through their meetings. So in this is the table of contents. For example, in section 1, cool lifestyle practices is one sort of category they have. You know, number 1, dumping on garbage, reducing your solid waste. Number 2, am I clean yet? Reducing hot water used in showers, and so on. If I go down to section 2, it's a little bit more about systems in the home, like number 11, meet your water heater, making your water heater more efficient. Or 12, installing energy efficient lights. And of course, since then, there's changed from CFLs to LEDs. So some things are out of date. If you look at number 16, I just want to mention that because I'm going to show you the page for it, switching to renewable energy. So each of those numbered topics we have a page that gives you more detail, and it gives goals for members on an eco team to take action and make reductions. And actually at the very bottom here, once you've taken an action, you can they measure how much you can take a credit for. This is 200 pounds of CO2 reduction for each 100 kilowatt hour of green power that you purchase. So the way the eco teams work, that's the book, which is a helpful guide. The way the teams work is we scheduled 4 meetings for each team. They typically met once a week on a regular schedule, or sometimes once every other week if that was too compressed. And most of them met in household living rooms, but sometimes in other spaces. For example, this is in one of the churches in Winchester, and this was one of the largest groups that we had operating, and they met, like the other groups, 4 times. And you can see on the left there, somebody has their blue low carbon diet book in their lap. And during those 4 meetings, what happens? People are using their books to guide them through their goals for each meeting, and then they share what they've done at the meeting. They discuss the progress they've made, and naturally they enjoy some refreshments and do some socializing. Between the meetings, there is material in the book to read, and there are various kinds of actions to take between meetings. The first action that I would want to describe is calculating one's carbon footprint. That comes early in the process. So we know what are our household emissions to begin with. We actually created our own household carbon calculator, which is now a bit out of date. For example, it assumes all cars either use gasoline or diesel fuel, and there's no mention of electric vehicles. So this would have to be modified to be reused. But anyway, it was pretty cool. It's actually an Excel spreadsheet. Excuse my cough. So for example, in the first one here, how many gallons of garbage, not recycling, do you put out each week? And if you enter the number here in gallons, it'll convert over here to the pounds CO2 emitted per year. And so you fill out all these things for your household, and you'll come out with a rough estimation of what your CO2 emissions are per year, which is a useful starting point to have. So once you've got your carbon footprint, then you work on developing an action plan, how to reduce that footprint. And you take actions and you record the results. So for that process, we created another spreadsheet. And I don't think all groups, all eco-team events in different towns would make their own materials, but we found this was useful. So anyway, this one person puts in their own information at the top. You can enter, remember on the carbon calculator, your footprint. So you can enter the number that you got from that in here. Then you can decide, just somewhat arbitrarily, what percentage do you want to reduce your emissions by? So this hypothetical case was 20%. And it calculates then that's how many pounds you've got to reduce during the course of your eco-team experience. Going down on the page here, each section in the book, like remember we read about dumping on garbage or am I clean yet? Each section has a place where you can enter, if you've achieved your goal for that, you can enter how many pounds you've reduced in that particular action. And you can go, it's going all through all the actions in the book. So eventually you end up with a total at the bottom, and you can see what your reduction has been. And then at the end of the process, you can decide there are certain things you haven't been able to do yet because it takes long, like purchasing an Energy Star front load washer. Well, didn't have time to do that in 4 weeks. It could be planned for later. And you can even say when you want to do it later. So that basically gives you a pretty good sense of what you've achieved in just 4 meetings or 4 weeks in terms of reducing your household emissions. And all the eco teams and all participants had substantial reductions just in those 4 weeks, and they plan to take future actions. So at the last eco team meeting, we would share our emission reduction results with each other. We'd celebrate our achievements, socialize, and of course, have more refreshments. I think it's interesting to note, and this both in terms of Natasha's program and ours, that in Winchester, we have a lot of environmental activists in Winchester now. And when I look at who they are, almost all of them were, not John actually, because I don't think he was here yet, but almost all of them were actually on eco teams once. And I sort of have to wonder, you don't know the causality, but anyway, could this have been part of the reason that they were on eco teams? It kind of got them committed and got them moving. So anyway, if you want to contact me, you can, about any of these issues or about eco teams, you can write me at coolwinchester@gmail.com, and that will get forwarded to me. So thank you for your attention, and I'm going to toss it off to Natasha. Oh, I got to relinquish my screen first. There we go.
Thanks, Alan. That's actually a great overview because it's so much similar to what we're doing. So you kind of get an understanding of the program. Now it's all digital, like everything in the world. So, and which allows you to get a lot more complexity too. What I thought I would just go over, since you already heard my presentation in the main section, I kind of pulled out 4 key factors that I think are transferable and adaptable to other communities that might be helpful in this sort of like, how do we go beyond the usual suspects? So one was what I had mentioned before, and you saw the bar graphs for, was that idea of this benevolent pyramid scheme. And so like, and that could be, and it sounds like, Alan, when you guys were doing the eco teams, it had a kind of a similar structure where you find people who find people who find people. And if anyone's read Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point, I've reminded of that, of the connectors and the importance of the connectors and how you can find these people in your community. We were particularly successful finding block leaders through a well-loved school principal who held a meeting for us and brought her parents to that, and a well-loved community builder who has a cafe and knows everyone and is very well respected. I think he got 70 people to show up for our information session. He was our #1 recruiter. And then, so within this, this sort of benevolent pyramid scheme idea, you also need to realize that you're training some new leaders, which is exactly what we want. And I have to say, when we first were getting started, it was not the usual suspects showing up, and we were almost a little disappointed. We're like, why are not our best friend climate activists coming to these meetings? And then we realized this is actually even better. Those people are already so busy, they're working every day on these issues, but who we were seeing were people, faces we hadn't seen, or faces we knew from around town and didn't even know were interested, but they had not found a way to plug in. And not everyone is in a place in their life where they want to be the leader, but if you give them enough structure, then they can take a lead, and you help train them and give them the support to take sort of a minor role lead. And so, and then also within this structure, the neighbor to neighbor part, I think, is really brilliant, because my initial instinct was, can't we just invite our friends? That's like so much simpler, can I just get my group of friends together? But then you really are, it's just the same people talking to the same people. It still remains in the choir. And when you do it with the neighbors, you extend beyond who you're normally engaged with, but you still have this shared purpose because you have this geographic connection that, like, literally you have common ground to start from. So it gives you a way to start talking to people that you didn't, you hadn't been talking to before. And then, so that kind of brings me to my second theme, which is finding common ground, which I think is really important. And I know the eco teams really focus just on the eco part. The interesting thing about the Cool Block program is it has this disaster resilience and community building piece that is really important here in California. I know, I hear you don't have as many natural disasters back there, but we've been having a lot over the past about 4 years. And so the community really comes out for that. It's really top of mind. So that was a way to get people involved who might, be turned off by the idea of just carbon reduction. And the idea, after 2 years of pandemic, of getting to know your neighbors better has been also very appealing to people. And so, something to think about in your own towns is, like, what might be a common interest that could be added into a climate change program that's not just carbon reduction and climate focused, because then you can start to reach beyond and start to be talking to people who are outside of the normals, the usual people. And then the third thing that I think has really been helpful is having clear instructions, step by step. And as Alan was showing in the book, they're what they call recipes. So really, it leads you step by step. You don't have to stop and figure everything out, because that can be a real roadblock, especially as busy as people are now. And then building in, even though it's very prescriptive in a lot of ways, building in lots of choice so that people feel like they can find something that fits their lifestyle, fits whatever their capabilities are. And also, we really emphasize no shaming, right? Like, this is not something where you're going to go and get embarrassed because you're not doing something right. You can find something for every level of accomplishment, and then be inspired by people who are doing things beyond what you're doing. We've definitely seen that throughout our community. People love to share their expertise. And so now, just after doing the first topics on the disaster preparedness, many of the blocks that I've talked to have found their sort of prepper on the block, their survivalist who has all the skills and is super excited to share. And then within that too, the cumulative impact that people can see, that really is a big motivator. And then just fourthly and briefly, I think the other thing that has really helped, which I mentioned before, is having some piece of leadership training within the program so that you can start to train up those new leaders. And as Alan said, with the hopes that they will then become leaders in the community too, that they can transfer those skills. And maybe this is the on-ramp for them into city council positions or commission positions and being more active in the community. So we do things like we practice the door knocking, because that's a really scary part for people, just going up to their neighbors. We practice turning limiting beliefs and turnarounds. So like, how do you kind of catch yourself when you're holding yourself back? And how do you shift from focusing on what's not working to focusing on what you want and how to create it? And that tends to be much more inspiring and energizing. So I hope that those 4 things might apply to you all in some way. And I'm happy to take questions or have a little discussion about how those might apply within your communities.
Yeah, I'd like to, if I can just jump in, say a couple of things. That's great, Natasha. And we can have some questions in a second. I think, if anyone attending here today wants to try to mount such a campaign, whether it's more like the eco teams or more like the Cool Cities program that Natasha has described, I think that's possible. And certainly in terms, if it was to be an eco team type program, which is really similar, you certainly want to upgrade it. I mean, if I was to do it again, I would take a lot of the ideas that Natasha has been describing and incorporate it into a new effort. What I'd just like to point out, I see somebody here who is actually my cohort in the Cool Winchester program, Roseanne Essiambre. She's in the group here. And Roseanne, if you wanted to say anything first, that would be nice. If not, that's okay. You can say something later. But she was a very integral part of our pulling off our much more modest, but still good program way back when. Roseanne?
Yeah, I thank you, Alan. I think I'd say, first, I didn't realize we were ahead of our times when we were doing it. So we did this program over 10 years ago. And I was a little surprised when I came to Lexington and started working in their group just before the pandemic hit. Mass Energize and Energize the Towns that's going on. It's very similar where they're going through the various actions. And I was surprised 10 years later, we're still focused on that piece. So that's why I say I didn't realize we were ahead of our times at that point. The other thing that I'd say is there's more interest in this topic now than there was 10 years ago. So it's really talking about the various pain points that people are experiencing or concerned about related to climate change and talking about that with people around you, right? And you'll be surprised who then says, or you post on Facebook and they see something you post and, they might reach out to you and say, hey, I'm interested in this. How do I get involved? So the more you can let people know these efforts are going on, the more you're going to be able to reach beyond that choir and start getting them engaged. And it's about thinking about it from their perspective. Right? So what is it they're really caring about? Right now, people are really concerned about the high heating bills that they're getting, the high electricity bills that they're going to have in the summer. So as much as we want to reduce the carbon, right, from their perspective, they may be more focused on reducing costs. And engaging them that way is still a win for us because them reducing their electricity bills and gas bills is a win for reducing carbon as well. So it's all about speaking their language and what is going to get them interested in it. So thank you,
Thanks,
Ellen.
Roseanne. Those are great thoughts. And I just have to point out, I had no idea she was going to be here and she had no idea I was going to call on her. So thank you, Roseanne. That was impressive. So maybe, is it a time for people? I think we've got a small enough group. People could just raise their hand for if they want to speak or have a question. That would be, we could do that now if anyone has a question, because it's nearing the end of our time. We've got time to discuss this more. I see Lisa T has
And
her hand up, I believe.
And Alan, I know they said we could stay a little later if we wanted to. I'm happy to stay longer. if
Yeah,
want to stay on.
we could stay as long as 11:30. People can at 11 if they wanted to. They could bail out and go back to the main room where there may or may not be any further activity. So in some sense, before you leave here, I should at least thank you for coming in case you're leaving and there's nothing else to go to. It's great to have you here today. But so Lisa, you had your hand up?
Yes, and can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Because I'm actually talking through another line than my video is showing.
it works.
So thank you both so much. I've been doing climate activism work for quite a while. I'm on the Energy Commission in Melrose, and I'm also very involved in my workplace. I work in a healthcare system to reach out to other my colleagues and to leadership around my system taking action around climate change. But I really appreciated, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the person from California, but
Natasha.
Natasha, you said something I thought was really key in terms of developing leadership skills in people. And you said, one of which is to practice things that we're asking people to do that's outside of their comfort zone, which I think is great. And then catching your limiting beliefs and shifting focus on the negative to what you want. I wonder if you'd say more about that, because I think those are really two key things in helping people to move forward and reaching out to other folks, which I will also say, I just want to thank you for this topic because it's so important. I think, I think talking to ourselves has only gotten us so far, and it's so important to expand the network and really create a vision for what a sustainable world and sustainable communities look like. Because it's not just, electrifying everything. It's really living in different ways. So, but I'd love you to talk about that. Thanks.
Yeah. Great point. And so it is interesting because I wouldn't have thought of this on my own either, but it has been very, very useful, and people have actually found it very helpful. So we do this 3.5-hour training for all of our block leaders, and a chunk of that training is about sort of empowerment methodologies, practicing, giving them tools to take a limiting belief like, I don't have enough time to do this, or I'm too shy to knock on my neighbor's doors, and turning those around into, this is something I've always wanted to do. And I'm, this is going to be my fun time. I get to do this. And so this is going to be my fun time, not something I have to do, but something I get to do. And it's going to be more fun and productive than watching another show on Netflix, or, for the, I'm too shy, because honestly, I'm an extrovert by nature, but I'm also very shy. So the idea of knocking on doors horrifies me as well. But in my mind, I turn that around into, I have been too shy to knock on my neighbor's doors. And so this is going to give me the perfect opportunity to do something I've always wanted to. It's an excuse to go and meet some of my neighbors that I haven't. And this will be something I'll be able to relationships I'll benefit from for years to come. And so teaching people to do that and doing it in the group setting, I think is really nice because they get to hear each other's fears and then work through them together. And now that we trained 50 people in January, and we just trained another 50 last week. And then now the great thing is we're getting to use the stories from the first group to help, inform the second group and say, Cinda was super afraid she thought her neighbors were going to totally reject her, and they ended up inviting her for coffee and having this great time, and she was rejected by nobody. And, like using real life stories to empower that and show that it is true. And I am happy if you email me, I put my email in there, natasha.j@coolpetaluma.org. I'm happy to share the script I use for those trainings too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Diane's had her hand up for a long time. I think she's next.
Thanks to both of you. This is really very inspiring, helpful. Our local Mothers Out Front chapter just started this winter trying to do something very similar, hyper local, two precincts getting together, so neighbors are hearing from their neighbors, people they see in the neighborhood, maybe they don't know. And the first one was very successful, and we're doing another one in April with 2 houses of worship. The problem that one of the problems in Brookline is we have a transient population because of all the institutions around here. And we have a lot of renters and condo owners. And, it's much easier for homeowners to take action than for people in those other situations. And we do try to list things that renters and condo owners can also take action on, but wondering if you have any guidance for how to handle those situations.
That's a really great question. I know working with Irvine as one of our sister cities, they have a lot of HOAs, which has been a whole nother hurdle too, because of the requirements and rules around HOAs. So that is something that can change how you work in this. But interestingly, a lot of the actions, because a lot of these are now behavior changes, you don't have to be a homeowner to participate at all. Homeowners associations, maybe you don't have them there. Yeah, sorry. Acronyms. Homeowners associations, which have rules about like you can't solicit, or you have to go through certain parameters, and so, but yes, I think focusing on the behavior change pieces, but if there are a lot of people who don't live there for very long, I can see that being hard for the sort of neighbor to neighbor relation. Although even if you're passing, traveling through a town, it is fun to meet people. And so creating that sort of fun atmosphere, I saw somebody put in the chat something about block parties earlier, creating that, even if it's not a long-term community, but how do you create a sense of fun around it? And maybe it's fun to get to know people who are just passing through, and maybe they've come from some interesting place. So, adding that in and being creative around it, and then focusing on things, food, transportation, all kinds of other things beyond just, insulation and heat pumps.
Yeah, great. If I could, Janet's been waiting, but before I call on Janet, Diane, if I could just ask you, I'm curious, what kind of curriculum, what kind of materials, like, for Cool Winchester, we had the book. For Cool Cities, they have actually a website that provides guidance as to how to go through the process. But I'm wondering, did you have any materials to help with your groups?
We're just starting this. We had, a Zoom presentation and a follow-up resource guide, and, focusing on immediate actions that people should take about getting a mass save audit, signing up for green electricity, and actually calling their legislators on Beacon Hill to say, we need help to do this. And it was really more focused on decarbonizing your home.
So you invented your own process, basically.
Exactly.
Cool.
But now that I know that there are other processes out there, we can.
It would probably help for you to see the other resources. It would give you more ideas of how to expand on it, and like, for example, having a carbon calculator or all kinds of other things you might be able to do. Yeah. So I need to go to Janet, who's been waiting.
Yeah, my question, well, let me introduce myself briefly. I'm on the, I'm Janet Miller. I'm on the Comprehensive Sustainability and Energy Committee in the town of Concord. It's a long name. And we are putting on a sustainability series this spring. But my question was for you, Alan. You had that carbon calculator, which you developed some years ago. And you mentioned that it needed to be updated, but you haven't updated it. I mean, how useful was it in the first place? And are you planning to update it?
Well, it was integral to what we did at the time. It was really our first step of before we needed to know what are we doing in our homes before we decide how to improve things. No, the reason we haven't updated it is because we did this program for about 2 years, from 2009 to 2011. And we had those 20 teams, 140 households. But frankly, at the end of that, and there's some lessons there, it was a lot of work to manage by volunteers. And this is an interesting topic in relation to the Cool Cities program. Especially, we were trying to focus on data collection and making sure we got exactly how many pounds everybody was doing and this, that, and the other. And to collect all that information and collect the information from all the action plans, and to get everyone in the eco team to finish everything and to have a final sort of report on the eco team was burdensome. So anyway, we haven't run any teams since then. So that's why we haven't updated our materials, because we haven't used them. I just have them on my computer still, so I can share them. So yeah, and one important question is can this be done at scale? I mean, the scale that Cool Cities is looking at is really impressive and exciting. Can you get to any kind of scale like that without having it with paid staff and funding to cover some costs, instead of doing it as we did?
And I will just say there are quite a few carbon calculators out there now.
Oh,
I
tons of
just
them, yeah.
dropped in the chat the one that I've used in the past. I know the Cool Block program has its own carbon calculator built into the website that corresponds with the actions you take, and is a little bit of a simplified version, but they are fun to play around with.
Yeah, the reason we made our own was to customize it for Winchester. We thought everything we looked at wasn't quite right, so we figured, well, we'll just make our own.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I can go on, I guess, to Deborah. in Carlisle,
Hi, yeah,
Massachusetts.
I'm out in Carlisle, Massachusetts, and much smaller town than Brookline, different issues. But has anyone ever addressed encouraging people to change to a plant-based diet in this, or is that just a step too far?
No,
That's in our program. Yeah.
yeah, maybe actually it reminds me of another topic too, but yes, I noticed in the chat earlier, somebody said, well, isn't anybody talking about transportation? Well, of course, in the eco teams, that and in the Cool Cities program, I'm sure that's one of the components, you know, what do you drive? Do you walk? Do you bike? All these things. That's all part of the process of personal change. Yeah.
Our program does include, we don't necessarily use the word vegan because that can be a little polarizing, but a plant-based diet. In fact, when I'm doing the training, I use my Mostly Plants cookbook as an example of just like, you know, that the website is like a recipe book, like you use it like a cookbook. And that's one of my, you know, so yes, definitely talking about things like that. And food waste as well is a huge issue. And composting, the methane from food in the landfills. So food is a huge category and we do cover that.
Yeah, I might just add in like if those who know Project Drawdown, having a non-meat based diet, you know, to foregoing red meat is considered a significant issue because of all of the issues of forest clearing, of growing soybeans, of what happens in feedlots. I mean, the list is long in terms of beef production, as I'm sure you all know.
I was going to say the engineering firm called Arup. They do a lot of research into sustainability, and they just for the UK they came out with changing to a plant-based diet was one of the top 5 things you can do. So I think it's much more important and it's something we don't address here so much here. I think in the US.
So are there, I appreciate that folks here didn't bail out and go back to the main group, which probably doesn't exist anymore. But it's wonderful to have this discussion. Are there more questions that people would like to raise or talk about? I see Lisa's back in the fray.
I just wanted to respond to what the last person said. I think that's such an important point because when I looked at Senator Barrett's slides about what kind of energy use we use in Massachusetts, it's really because we've exported a lot of the other things that we use that contribute to greenhouse gas emissions to other states and other parts of the world. So like, you know, if we're exporting all of our food production like to Brazil and the Amazon rainforests are being cleared for, you know, to produce meat, or I was in Bed Bath & Beyond yesterday to buy a couple things and like everything there's made in China. So even though we say we don't have industrial, you know, carbon from like industrialization in Massachusetts, we really are by everything that we're using. So thinking about how we contribute to the larger sphere is also, I think, an important piece of work for us here.
Yes,
And,
yes,
and
yes.
more of a
I
social
applaud that
justice
comment. Yeah.
standpoint, right?
Yeah, we actually talk a lot about that in this town, and we have a whole bunch of people really trying to get consumption-based emissions to be talked about at a city level, which economic development people don't like, but it's interesting when we've been out on the ground doing these big visionings with people, everyone wants to share resources and get rid of, and so just creating a share economy too, where we share tools and food and books and whatever it is, and getting away from stuff. We don't talk about the impact of all the stuff that we import and use and throw away and don't really need.
So it's a whole different way of relating to your neighbors too. So it has both social impacts, not just technological impacts of sort of where our core energy is coming from. It's a very creative process, and there's we have a chance to, as you were saying, build a vision for the future.
Yeah, and it's been very surprising to me, happily surprising, how many people actually share that vision. We just haven't really been talking about it.
So Lisa's been waiting. I'd love to call on her in Wellesley, Mass.
Thanks. So maybe you said this, Natasha, but if you could clarify sort of what the role of your municipal government has been in the Cool Petaluma project. Do you work for the town? Are you connected to the town? Has the town been involved in some way? Just if you could talk a little bit about that.
Great question. Yeah, so the grant opportunity was found by one of our council members. We are supported by our city manager, our mayor, etc., but we do not work for the city. It's kind of a weird arrangement where the Empowerment Institute's grant, the $1 million grant, is actually it's really only $125,000 a year for staff. We have 3 staff members. We divide that by, and it goes directly to that. We're actually looking at forming our own 501c3 around that. So we're not employees of the city, but we do have, and also being like all of you, I think being a small town is an advantage in that we have really close relationships with our city government, and they're totally 100% on board, and we're just supporting them in an area that actually is sometimes hard for them, which is this sort of household behavior change, grassrootsy kind of thing. I hope that answers your question. Do you have
it's a $1 million grant over the course of some number of years?
About 5 years. Yeah. Yeah. So the half the money gets spent for the first 3 years. So the 125,000 a year, sorry, for the first 4 years is on staff. Specifically, they're very specific about how it gets spent, to make sure that it keeps going. And it's actually become a ton of work because we have such great traction. Good problem to have. And then the second half is going to go towards, after we've completed 400 blocks, we propose a project for a cool neighborhood. So expanding this to like about 10 block scale area. And then we'll propose a project, and that's where the second 500,000 will go into that cool neighborhood project. A lot of this is sort of being worked out as we go because no one has ever gotten to carbon neutral by 2030. So it's, kind of feeling out, okay, where do we get traction, what works, and how do we then amplify those efforts?
Great. Roseanne, my old partner again.
Yeah, one of the other things I wanted to add that I didn't hear, apologies if I missed it, Alan. One of the things we also did with Cool Winchester is we had a website of resources locally to go along with each action in the low carbon diet. So we did the homework for people, and they didn't have to go search, well, how do I go do this in Winchester? How do I go do that in Winchester? So having a supplemental resource like that along with the program, again, as Natasha was saying, make it easy for people and prescriptive. That really helped as well.
Yeah, we've been doing that, and it's a lot of work in the back end, but why have everyone have to duplicate that work?
Exactly.
do it once. And then the interesting thing is our block leaders now are sending us stuff too, like, oh, I found this, and we're like, add it in, but
Right,
the
you enhance it as you go.
Exactly. And now the trick is like really figuring out what kind of structure we can create to hold all that information. Somebody was talking about like creating almost like a wiki, like how do we, and as more stuff comes in, how do you keep it manageable and easy to find and find at the right time and keep it up to date? And so, yeah, there is work behind there, but I do feel like it's such an important part of it. There are things in our town resources I didn't even know we had. The library has a kit that you can check out and use the stuff in there to seal your windows, and then you give it back empty and they refill it. I didn't know they had that, so this is, I think, really an important key part of it.
Yeah, and it's community building too. As people share resources, they get
Yep.
to know their neighbors. So there's several benefits that come out of these kinds of programs.
And some people love to, I guess they're called the mavens in the Tipping Point, book, but like people love to share their knowledge, and we're like, yes, bring it on.
So, any more thoughts or comments? Be great if somebody would, as Roseanne and I are sharing, it was actually a lot of work doing all this stuff, but you could but as one of you mentioned, you could do a simplified version and get started and build on that. So whatever method you use is worth considering, I would think. Janet's got her hand up.
I just wanted to add to the previous person's comment about, making it easy. I know the Concord Library and I think several other libraries have a library of things. So you can borrow an induction plate, for example, try it out at home and realize induction cooking is great. And it doesn't require methane that keep, it's much cleaner than burning gas. So that's all I wanted to say.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think maybe all of our libraries around here have that. I know the Winchester Library does. You can have devices for measuring your electrical consumption, like the kilowatt devices, or they have devices for measuring heat loss through the walls. Those are available.
Yeah, and I think combining that, all of those resources and all that information or checklists or whatever, combining that with the small group accountability and sort of team spirit is like the secret sauce, because like I dropped it in the chat. I made a nice checklist for my local 350 Petaluma group that I was on the steering committee. I don't know how many people used it, it kind of sits around a website static. But you think about like how these small groups, like how many people know a book club that's gone on for like 20, 30, 40 years? Why is it so enduring, right? There's something about those small social groups that can really help to keep traction going, I think.
Great. I'd like to, while we have a pause here, thank John he's managing our recording. He's also watching out. If anyone is highly disruptive, he's ready to throw them out. Looks like he didn't have to do that. And in fact, he didn't even have to manage the muting because we're also civilized and cooperative and nice. So, but thank you, John, for your help.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And just to mention that I know you were talking about the book. I'm not totally sure. I have that old book too, the low carbon diet one. But I do know that the coolblock.org website, which I dropped in the chat, you can sign on just household by household. You don't have to be a part of the larger program. I think it's $20 per household to use the platform. You won't get the benefit, like Roseanne was saying, of having all the curated resources. But I know that for the future grant opportunities, they're looking for larger cities. I actually think the smaller towns like us get way more traction way faster. So I'm trying to also compile what I'm calling the Petaluma Playbook. I'm trying to keep track of what we're doing so I can share it with whoever wants it, just so we don't, we can all share success and trials so that we can move faster.
So I could join up I could just individually join up for $20 and see some, but not all of the resources they have.
You can see all the general resources, you just won't have the ones curated for your town.
That'd probably be worth doing just to add to my knowledge from the past and from you. Yeah, that'd be great. So I don't see any more hands up in the air. I think we might be done. This was fantastic. I really appreciate it, Natasha. That was very helpful, and all of your various questions were fantastic. And so I guess we can leave the room, and then I guess after that you'll probably leave the meeting, something like that.
Yeah, and I
So-
just dropped one more time my contact info. If anybody wants to contact me, I'm happy to talk further or send, if you are interested in our future Petaluma playbook, I can start creating a little list for that. But yeah, I hope that, there's
Yeah.
been some useful info.
Well, maybe this was the Cool City's first inroad into Massachusetts with your national and global and intergalactic effort. This is this first step in Massachusetts, huh? Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot. Goodbye, everybody, and thanks so much for coming.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Yeah, bye-bye.